Do Jews control the media? Well, when you're saying do Jews control the media? Well, let me tell you, I'm Jewish. I'm controlling the media because I have a YouTube channel and I'm controlling the YouTube, and YouTube is media. And I can delete. I'm controlling now. Like, look, you can see me in full screen. I'm controlling it, and I'm Jewish. So yes, we obviously control the media. I can delete videos. I can upload videos. I can answer comments. I'm controlling the media. That's crazy. So of course the Jews control the media.
Marlon Brando was one of the biggest stars Hollywood ever created. He spent decades bucking the system, trashing the press, insulting politicians, even slamming his own industry. He had so much clout that in 1973, he skipped the Oscars and sent a Native American activist to reject his Best Actor award for The Godfather.
Accepting the award
Nice.
for Marlon Brando and The Godfather, Miss Shasheen Littlefeather.
It was vintage Brando, and he got away with all of it until he said that Jews run Hollywood.
Hollywood is run by Jews. It's owned by Jews. And they should have a greater sensitivity about the issue of people who are suffering.
Days later, Brando issued a written
You know what the problem is? Even if like the Hollywood run by Jews, and it was. Today Hollywood is big can of garbage. Hollywood is done for many years now, for like 10 years. Most movies are garbage. So the problem is that if it was like Spanish people, they won't say like, hey, the Spanish control Hollywood. But Israel's, Jewish people, they would say like, yeah, they control the media. That's the problem. Because that's the problem. They're saying, yeah, they control the media. They control Hollywood. They're Jews. They won't say it like if it was Greek. They won't say the Greek control the media.
apology through the Simon
It's pure anti-Semitic, yeah? Anti-Semitism, that's the one.
Wiesenthal Center, and then apologized to Jewish leaders in person. I'm Ken LaCourte. Here I look at controversial topics.
Are you Jewish,
sometimes
Ken
radioactive
LaCourte?
ones like
With
this.
this last
Not
name, I
hate
don't
or
think so.
finger-pointing. I truly believe these issues and subjects
Maybe you should
help us
convert.
understand how our world works, and that's got to be a good thing. So let's talk about the elephant in the room.
The elephant
Jews
in the
control
room is here, behind here. Oh, this is his channel name, I think. But I thought that this elephant in the room, he got like a yarmulke, you know? Maybe he's Jewish, the elephant.
And that's got to be a good thing. So let's talk about the elephant in the room. Do Jews control the media? It's
Yes.
a tricky topic for a couple reasons.
Yes,
and I think
well.
the top one is anti-Semites really love to talk about it. I mean, there's a large group of people out
is
there
this?
who blame Jews for anything bad in life. I did a video about illegal immigration in the United States, and a number of comments just said it was all caused by the Jews, which I found odd. There are a lot of memes
Odd,
you see on
terrible.
social media saying Jews run every news outlet imaginable, and they often just make up those facts. Heck, I've been accused here of both working for the Mossad and of being funded by Jewish groups. Again, odd. But on the other side, you have Jewish organizations like the Anti-Defamation League who essentially say this topic here, it's not a theory to examine, but an anti-Semitic question in and of itself.
Yes.
According to the ADL, even suggesting that Jews have disproportionate influence in media is one of the core tropes of anti-Semitism. And when Americans say things like that in polls, it's used as evidence of bigotry. A 2015 poll shows 25% of people worldwide believe Jews have too much control over the media. To the ADL, those numbers are troubling. But to me, they're a starting point for a real conversation. Because reality is somewhere between those two extremes. And in that space is a place for some honest talk. And the antidote to bad opinions, it's not censorship, it's more speech, smarter speech. And look, this is a topic that matters because the media is important. It doesn't just report about things, it shapes our culture. Whether we like it or not, a huge part of how we see the world comes from what we watch, what we read, and what shows up in our feeds. And if one group has an outsized role in deciding that content, then yeah, it's worthy understanding how and why. So I worked at Fox News for a long time. And one time I was out in the
This is
field
you?
for a big trial, and we had a good number of staffers
Handsome.
there. That dinner, I looked around the table and noticed that about a quarter of them were Jewish. Now, I mean, it didn't bother me. I mean, these were my
But-
friends. But knowing that Jews comprise about 2% of the country, it certainly raised my curiosity. 20 years later, I'm trying to answer that question. But how? I mean, it's not like you can bring this up in the break room
How, without getting your video deleted from YouTube? How?
without getting a call from HR. There's no index, there's no scorecard or official media control database. But the question still matters, so let's break it down. Because to properly answer, do Jews control the media, you actually have to define all three parts of that sentence. I mean, first, what does it mean to be Jewish? Is it a religion, an ethnicity, a culture? If your mom's Jewish but you're an atheist, what are you? What if you light Hanukkah candles but also eat bacon and don't believe in God?
You're still.
Jews argue about this.
All
So
of the
first part
answers is Jewish.
the question is, it's more complicated than it sounds. Then there's the word control. I mean, and that's the one that freaks out a lot of people. It conjures up images of smoke-filled
this meme.
rooms, puppet strings, and secret meetings. But is that what control means? Or does it mean something softer, like heavy influence, disproportionate ownership, cultural shaping? Control can mean owns the company, or it can mean set the tone. And those are different things. And what's the media? This one's probably the hardest to answer. I mean, 50 years ago, it was pretty easy because it was a narrow universe. You had 3 broadcast networks, 1 or 2 big newspapers in each city.
They're talking about
a handful
Hollywood.
of national magazines, and a bunch of radio stations. That was it. Today, it's radically different. The traditional players are still there. 5,000 newspapers, over 1,000 TV stations, 15,000 radio stations. But what we've recently seen is an explosion of thousands of new media outlets, big and small, and pundits and influencers. Heck, even me. And the AI boom is going to make that universe
Even you.
bigger. So let's start with the easiest part of the media to analyze. Do Jews control Hollywood? And the answer
Yes.
to that, it's a pretty solid yes. Although it's a lot more historically true than today because it's dispersing like the rest of the media. And Jews didn't just run Hollywood, they created it. The founders of Paramount, Universal, 20th Century Fox, MGM, Warner Brothers, they weren't Hollywood royalty when they started. They were Jewish immigrants, many of them poor, all of them outsiders. They didn't come from power, but they built it. And by the 20s and 30s, they'd turned the novelty of silent films into a national obsession. They locked down the whole system. Actors, writers, directors, and created an industry where a handful of companies controlled what got made. But it didn't stop with the studios. The whole industry evolved around them. Agencies, managers, publicists, financiers. Success bred infrastructure. People hired their friends, mentored people like themselves, helped the next generation, and over time, that became a pipeline, one that was mostly Jewish. And not because of a master plan, but because that's how networks work. And at the top of every one of the companies I mentioned were Jewish executives. As they grew in influence, they controlled not just movies.
Yeah, I get. What's the problem? Like, yeah, so they're Jewish. Like, what's the problem? I
how
don't
America
understand.
saw itself. Interestingly, for the first few decades of that, they rarely made anything overtly Jewish. Hollywood wasn't pushing
Like, who cares?
religion or broadcasting Jewish pride. In fact, the early moguls, they were worried about drawing attention to that. They didn't want to be seen as outsiders or tribal. They wanted to be Americans, to sell the American dream. So
Yeah.
for years, they stayed away from Jewish characters, Jewish stories, even Jewish names. It wasn't until the 60s and 70s that films and TV shows began to reflect more of that identity openly. And even then, it came in cautiously and slowly. Fast forward to today, and that legacy is still strong. The major studios, Disney, Paramount, Warner Brothers, Universal, are still disproportionately led by Jewish executives. The upper ranks of Hollywood's creative and business machinery remain filled with Jewish producers, agents, and financiers, but it is in the midst of a change. Because the biggest power centers today are tech companies, Netflix, Amazon, Apple, streaming platforms.
Also controlled
not
by
film
the Jews.
and while those companies have plenty of Jewish executives too, it's not the same as the old Hollywood machine. So aside from Hollywood, how influential are Jews throughout the rest of the media? Now, that's a harder question to answer than you think, because even for someone like me who spent decades in it, as I explained earlier, the media is massive. There are close to 2 million people working in it just in the United States. And unlike race or gender, there's no official box to check for religion. There's no public list of who's Jewish and who's not, which, for the record, is probably how it should be, because that can get a little creepy. The reality is also, I couldn't find any academic or journalistic study that tried to quantify the percentage of media ownership or leadership by religion or Jewish people. But a look at some of the very
What about less names?
largest media companies shows that a lot are run by Jewish people. ABC is owned by Disney, headed by Bob Iger. CBS is part of Paramount Global,
Not Jewish
controlled
name.
by Shari Redstone. NBC
Not
and
Jewish name.
MSNBC are owned by Comcast, which is run by Brian Roberts. CNN is part of Warner Brothers, run by David Zaslav. Facebook and Instagram is led by Mark Zuckerberg.
He's
Google
Jewish.
was co-founded by Sergey Brin, who's Jewish, though it's now run by Sundar Pichai, who's not. For most of its existence, YouTube was run by Susan Wojcicki. Reddit and a lot of other outlets are controlled by Advanced Publications, run by Donald Newhouse. And finally, there's the New York Times, which is still the flagship of American newspapers. It's run by A.G. Sulzberger and Meredith Kopit Levin. In fact,
So what? A lot of those companies, they're like, yeah, controlled by Jews or whatever. the Jewish state is Israel, and Disney is against Israel many times. New York Times against Israel. A lot of those networks are really against Israel. So what? So what if they are controlled by Jews?
In fact, since Adolph Oakes took over the Times and
My point is that if they are like against Israel, so they are a bit against Jews sometimes. Maybe not, but it's just saying that they doesn't care. They don't care about like they don't give favorism to Jews. You know, that's what I'm saying. They don't. So what? So they're Jewish people. So what? They're doing the right decision, right? Or the wrong decision. Not based on more Jews. That's what I'm saying. They're just making decision.
1896, it's been run by a Jewish member of his family ever since. So look, that's not a numerical study, but to me, it's clear that there's a representation of Jews at the top of US media that well exceeds their population numbers. So all of this still raises the big question: why? Why are Jews so overrepresented?
Why?
Not just in media, but in so many other high-achieving professions. Part of it's culture. For generations, Jewish communities emphasized education, literacy, and professional excellence. They account for a massive share of academic awards and top university slots and intellectual awards. They've won 22% of all Nobel Prizes. Heck, I did a whole video on that. They're disproportionately well-educated and disproportionately drawn to white-collar professions. And then there's the thing I described earlier. Networks matter. People help their friends. They mentor people they know. I once worked with a reporter who would regularly bring in a USC journalism grad when a job opened up at our company. Her community was her alma mater, and she wanted to help them out. And there's nothing overtly wrong with that. People help their friends, and when someone gets into a position of power, they often pull up others with them. That's human nature. But over time, it can create bubbles. If the same kind of people keep hiring and promoting the same kind of people, industries start to narrow. I'm not saying it's malicious, but gatekeeping doesn't always need a gate. And over the years, that can shape an industry. So what does all this tell us? It tells us that there's real overrepresentation in top leadership, especially in legacy media, Hollywood, and some major tech platforms. But it doesn't tell us how much that leadership actually changes the content that you and I see. So let's look at that. First, let's ask how much of being the big boss of a news organization, for instance, how does that actually affect its editorial point of view? Because it's not as straightforward as you might think. Let's start with one that is.
False news has become all too common on social media.
What is? What's going on? Make it stop, please.
Now, that's obviously creepy as hell, and it's clearly an example of someone high up in a corporation dictating editorial to a number of outlets. But generally, real life is a lot messier than that, especially in big media companies. Let me give you an example from Fox News, which is run by Rupert Murdoch. His company didn't run just Fox News. It owned over 200 media entities, newspapers, television stations, book publishers, magazines, movie studios, you name it. Those news outlets were all over the map geographically and often politically. Murdoch owned both the conservative New York Post and the very liberal Village Voice at the same time. And I can tell you firsthand that most of the Fox Entertainment Division guys hated Fox News. And so did a lot of the local Fox television stations around the country. So did Rupert Murdoch control all of it? Absolutely. He could hire and fire anyone he wanted. If he wanted a memo read on air, it'd get read on air, although
Cool.
I really don't
What's
recall
the
that
problem? I don't
But
understand.
practically speaking, no one's sitting at a desk approving every story or every segment. A media company that size makes thousands of editorial decisions every day, and those decisions are made by thousands of individual employees.
Yeah.
Here's where it gets interesting, though. Those employees, they're usually trying to be good journalists, but they're also trying to make the boss happy, because that's how you succeed in corporate life. You figure out what your boss's priorities are, even if they're unspoken. And that can absolutely affect the kind of journalism that gets done. Here's an example. In the early 2000s, Murdoch was trying to expand into China. He was traveling there constantly, investing heavily, and it was obvious that
How
the
is this
Chinese
related to
government
Jews?
didn't like what you were doing.
He didn't really
They weren't
answer
doing
the
any business
question.
there. Now imagine you're an editor at one of his outlets, and a pitch comes in, a big story about how Chinese are abusing people in their re-education camps. You didn't get a memo telling you to spike it. You've probably never even met the big boss, but you know what's going on, and in the back of your head, you're going to wonder, is this story going to create problems for me? It's not something that happens frequently, but it's real. Could you imagine being a producer at MSNBC who uncovers something really good about the Trump administration? How hard do you think he'd fight for that at the editorial staff meeting? That's how influence works in the real world. Rarely through orders from above, but from signals about who's in charge and what they care about. Which, of course, then leads us to the question, how does Jewish representation in media affect what we see? Did Brando have a point? Are Hollywood films more positive or at least less negative towards Jewish characters? I mean, I really don't know how to answer that one besides speculation. What I can say, though, from my personal experience watching Hollywood films and movies throughout my entire life, it's pretty clear that devout Christians are fairly often smacked around, portrayed as hypocrites, bigots, or just backwards rubes. It's hard to quantify or even give a fair perspective to how much that is, or
I didn't
how
really
much it
understand
deserves
this
to be.
part.
But to me, that seems apparent. And in the news world, how about there? From a wider perspective, American Jews are much more likely than the average American to be liberal and to vote Democratic. In the 2020 election, around 70% of Jewish voters went for Biden. They've been
Wow.
consistently one of the Democratic
What a
Party's
mistake.
most loyal voter blocs and contributors. So if you've got an industry with disproportionate Jewish leadership, and that group leans left politically, it's reasonable
Oh
to
my God, let
assume
me see that picture again. Let me see.
disproportionate Jewish
Oh my
leadership.
God. Oh my God. A lot of that's a terrible government. A terrible government. Oh, terrible picture. They need to replace everybody from left to right. All of those people need to quit. New people in. All of them.
And that group leans
Except of this guy. He needs to stay. All of them need to go. Everybody need to go. They need entirely new government. Only he need to stay. This guy.
left
See
politically.
him? He's good. Rest of them, not good. Not good.
It's reasonable to assume that it will move the center of gravity. My opinion,
Even if it's the same party, let it be the same party. New people. This is what's good in the US, that they're allowing only 4 years. In Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu is like 20 years. It's crazy.
I think that's one reason why what we used to call the mainstream media tends to have a liberal tilt. What about the coverage of Israel? This one's trickier. Over the years, the US media outlets have generally been sympathetic to Israel. They portrayed it
Sympathetic? Seriously? Hateful.
as a small, Western-style democracy surrounded by hostile authoritarian neighbors. September 11th, well, that hardened that very much. Americans watched
Oh.
Islamic extremists fly planes into buildings, and after that, the idea of Israel being under siege from similar enemies, well, that became a lot easier for everyone to believe. And in fairness, Israelis weren't the ones burning American flags or attacking US soldiers. That kind of thing makes a difference. You want better press in America? Don't blow up our people. That's not all that complicated. So yes, Jewish overrepresentation probably plays a role in how Israel is framed, but it's not the only reason. Geography, politics, history, terrorism, all of that matters. And anyone pretending it's just about who's Jewish in the newsroom, they're not looking at the full picture. But here's where the script flips. Because for all the talk about Jewish influence in the media, something strange has happened in the last few years, especially when it comes to Israel. Some of the outlets with the least Jewish leadership, like Fox News, Talk Radio, the broader conservative media sphere, have been the most pro-Israel. Not cautiously supportive, but full-throated. Flags on screens, IDF interviews, the whole thing. Meanwhile, a lot of the traditional mainstream press, outlets with far more Jewish executives and editors, they've gotten a lot more critical of Israel. The New York Times, MSNBC.
Okay,
CNN,
yes, this is
some
true.
of the toughest scrutiny
Everything he's saying is true. I just didn't follow the timeline, but everything he's saying is true.
of Israel has come from inside those institutions. In some cases, from Jewish reporters and editors themselves. So what happened?
What happened?
Short version, politics trumped identity. In today's culture war, your political alignment matters more than your background. The liberal media class, which includes plenty of Jews, is also shaped by progressive ideas about race, colonialism, power structure, and global justice. And those frameworks don't give Israel a pass. In fact, they often put it under a harsher lens. Meanwhile, the populist right, many who don't have any particular connection to Jews, have embraced Israel as a symbol of strength,
Wow.
and nationalism, and Western values
Wow,
under attack.
yeah.
So whatever influence Jewish identity might have had, in many ways it's now competing with something stronger, the gravitational pull of American politics. And for now, that's the louder force. But you know, even when the media is trying to help out a political cause, that doesn't always mean it's successful. I have a pretty counterintuitive theory that the left-leaning media
Elephant in the
actually
room,
helped
Ken.
elect-
Thank you so much, Ken. Ken, thank you. Like, for making this video, because lately, I don't know, I'm reviewing this guy because he's really doing good videos, like, seriously. So, yeah, but if anyone want, he can drop it in the comments, like, anything you want me to review. I'll check it out.